The biggest mistake I see people making are companies that were originally in person. Then they went remote for COVID, and they're still trying to pretend like they're in the office, even though they're not. I worked in corporate America for 20 plus years, and I was like, oh, this is what's safe and stable. And then on the other side, we lost a client. And I was like, oh, I just got fired for the first time in my career, and it had like a less than 1% impact on my pay. And I'm like, if I had gotten fired at any other point in my career, it would have had a 100% impact on my pay.
Imagine climbing up the ranks of corporate America, spending 20 years building up your career as a consultant and eventually as a COO, only to give it all up and buy an online business. And then imagine that business practically imploding overnight. That was the case for Dave Klein.
My wife and I bought a business. We were just in the beginning of COVID, so we bought one that was in the online education space. Within 6 weeks of buying it, Google changes the algorithm, the business gets cut in half. And we were like, oh my gosh. So this is what entrepreneurship looks like, huh?
Imagine climbing up the ranks of corporate America, spending 20 years building up your career as a consultant and eventually as a COO, only to give it all up and buy an online business. And then imagine that business practically imploding overnight. That was the case for Dave Klein, who is now the co-founder of Management Accelerator. But it didn't come overnight, and it certainly didn't come without the initial obstacles. You see, when their back was against the wall, he took a copywriting course by someone I interviewed on the channel already, Sahil Bloom. He started to slowly master Twitter and build a personal brand. And with just 3,000 followers and one single thread post, he started to go viral because he was talking about something that he knew deeply. Effectively what would lay the groundwork for the successful, thriving business called the Management Accelerator, which, by the way, he runs and operates with his wife. But what's most interesting about this entire interview was that Dave accidentally went viral. He knew the importance of content and content marketing, but he didn't think that it would grow exponentially and help him build a separate business that he had no intent on building in the first place. In fact, Dave has over 110,000 followers on LinkedIn, goes deeper into how he almost lost his business, how he's been able to launch this Management Accelerator, and we even took a deep dive into the intricacies of building an online business. So let's dive right in. So Dave, you and I met through a few mutual friends and acquaintances. You've been running in this, I would say, online entrepreneur circle, but it's more than that. It's deeper than that. When people think of online entrepreneur, they typically think of, kind of on one end, the ClickFunnels guys, which again, I actually appreciate the website, the software, that are very direct sales, almost infomercial-like salespeople. And then you have people who add a ton of value, who have deep understandings of frameworks, experiences, leadership, et cetera, who do really, really well in passing on that information. I would put you in this category alongside some of the peers and the people that you and I are acquainted with. Sahil Bloom, Chris Donnelly. Share a little bit about your background, the genesis effectively of Dave and where you are today, if you don't mind.
It's funny you mentioned Sahil because he dropped his book last week, and it was very interesting as someone I've gotten to know from the very beginning of my journey till now. I have that 20-year corporate career, consulting, Moody's, Bridgewater, and I left Bridgewater at the end of 20, and my wife and I bought a business we were going to have a portfolio of digital assets, right? We were sort of on the tail. We were just in the beginning of COVID. Everyone was at home. All the digital websites doing all kinds of stuff were going crazy. And so we bought one that was in the online education space. And it was going to be the first of many to have a portable passive income business. As we've come to learn, there's no such thing as passive income. And within 6 weeks of buying it, Google changes the algorithm. The business gets cut in half. And we were like, oh my gosh. So this is what entrepreneurship looks like, huh? And the master plan was then, well, let's just get into social media. Like, I know that I've never liked anything or shared anything or posted anything, but I'm sure we just go crack the code on that one. And by, somewhere between luck and circumstance, I ended up taking Sahil's class. He was teaching a class on how to grow a Twitter audience. And I had this master plan that I was going to go in there and grow the brand account. And within the first 2 sentences of the class, he's like, if you're here to grow a brand account, you're crazy. People don't want to learn from brands. They don't want to talk to brands. They want to talk to people. So you're going to need to write under your own sort of headline. And I remember coming downstairs to my wife and being like, I think I'm going to be a social media influencer now. this is like, I don't think I have another choice. And so I started writing for like a month, all kinds of stuff all over the place, and mostly got no traction. And a little bit of leadership and management stuff took off. And sort of hearing that signal and leaned into it. And sort of one thing led to another. And we met the folks from Maven. We built a program. We've now worked with 1,200 leaders. And I got to say, you sort of set it up the spectrum between the ClickFunnels guys who could sell anything and the people who've done a lot of things and might not know how to sell. I need to spend some time with the ClickFunnels guys. I'm like, I really do feel like, we've now worked with 1,200 leaders. The feedback we get is really strong. Now it's like, how do you go the other direction, right? The question that we're wrestling with is like, how big a business can we run by ourselves? Like I think years ago that might have like topped out at $500,000 or $1 million, but I think with the rise of AI and automation and the internet and like 4 or 5, offshore freelance resources, you're like, I don't know, can I get to 10 million bucks with just, a husband and wife? So we'll see.
Yeah, and I love that you gave that backstory and the context. And for the record, I think when I mention two camps in the opposite sides of the spectrum, there are the ones that sell really well, but there's no how do I say this nicely without offending anyone? There's really no substance to what they're selling. And so it gives people a bad rap. It gives the space of online community and coaching a bad rap because 80%, let's say hypothetically, obviously this isn't an actual stat, but the bulk of it are people who are really good at selling, but don't have the career, don't have the reps in to actually back up what it is that they're selling, the product. You guys have that. And so I think to your point, the product kind of sells itself. How do you like flip the switch and effectively get more people in the right way? So let's stay on that a little bit because I feel like there's a massive shift right now from when you had the Ty Lopez throwing in my garage, Google ad that ran through YouTube and did huge numbers for him, to now it's hard to, break even on ROAS for any info product, any coaching community, any course seller, unless they've built this one thing. And we could talk a little bit about what that is. But what do you think is kind of that missing element, whether for you guys or for anyone starting out, and maybe you can go back to the genesis of your first online business, that could prevent or expand, right? The business, prevent the downfall, so to speak, and expand the business fairly quickly and still maintain kind of a continuous surplus of clients.
Well, I think this is a great like test case to actually work out because I don't know that we are necessarily doing anything dramatically different than sort of call it the average online creator. We got to it in, I think, a slightly different order. I think pick Justin Welsh, right? He's put up a post many times of his napkin where it's like, do social, build trust with newsletter, sell info product, sell coaching. Like that's my whole business. To some degree, we just did it out of order. Like we had a small social following and then we built this program that converted really well off of a very small social following. So we skipped all of the capture and nurturing and trust in between. We sort of were going straight to social to this higher ticket item. And then over the last couple of years, we've been building backwards, right? We added in the newsletter, we added in more of a entry-level program, and I still have no digital products. And so I don't have anything, I don't have any recurring revenue membership service. I don't have anything that's like taking the relationships and trust and nurturing that we've created with at least a lot of our alums and continuing that on. And so for us right now, that's the debate, which is, if we had gone very linearly, we probably would have the entry-level product or the baseline community, and then we'd have the live courses, and then we'd have the coaching, and then we'd have, whatever, the masterminds or, again, I don't even think you have to be, I don't think the competitive advantage for our business is thinking of like new vehicles. I think it's delivering high quality insights and coaching and unlocks for people through vehicles everyone's familiar with. So I don't know, the debate for us has been this idea of, on one hand, do you go the community route? But for the most part, I think leaders and managers I'm not hearing a lot of clamoring from our community to be like, I just want to go randomly mix it up with people, right? Versus when you're selling, like if you're trying to learn how to grow on the internet and you're with 100 other people who want to grow on the internet, the community part becomes so vital. It's like I support you, you support me. It's positive sum. We grow together. With management and business, they're like, oh my god, I'm already so busy. I'm already managing teams. Like, I don't. I want to get in, get the coaching and answer I need, and get out. And so, you know, but does that change now with like the rise of AI and the rise of, you know, remote teams where people feel more lonely, or do we just go down the path of saying, no, we have a membership, and that membership entitles you to getting answers in written form, answers in recorded form, answers in live form. And you know, we're not making a promise of like we're going to be on Slack 24/7 and answering all your questions and nurturing people to meet each other. We're just going to make sure you get the answers you need and get out.
I love that. I wanted to touch on something that you shared earlier, which was that you invested early on, even though it wasn't your intention, on building up a personal brand through Twitter. And you shared this with me offline the first time that we met, whereby, yeah, it was kind of happenstance. But if correct me if I'm wrong, I think there was gosh, oh my gosh, my language. There's a tweet that went viral, or you basically posted something where you didn't even have the product built out and you had a massive wait list of people waiting for your product. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I feel like that may be the element there that maybe you're not giving yourself enough credit for is, I mean, you have 100 and what is it now? You have like 108,000 followers on LinkedIn, if I'm not mistaken, over 100,000.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was on Twitter at the time, but I mean, you've clearly invested in your personal brand. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So the it's kind of interesting. So when we wrote the thread you're talking about was on delegation, which in my mind I was like, well, how could you be a manager or a leader if you don't know how to delegate? It just seemed so obvious. But the light bulb moment was in talking to a handful of people, like none of them knew how to do it. And to some degree, you're like, that is like a cornerstone. If I can't take sort of a big pile of work and get it into the right hands of the right people, and they feel good about doing it, and they're growing and learning and developing from it, and it's getting off my plate so I can focus on the things only I can do, like, what are you managing? And so I heard it enough that I was like, well, how would I teach somebody how to delegate? And so I wrote a thread. It was probably 10 tweets long. And at the end, I was like, hey, I'm thinking about creating a leadership program that would include things like delegation and maybe these 3 or 4 other things. If you're interested, here's a survey for a wait list. And this would be back in my early naive marketing days. I accidentally created a ton of friction. It was a 10-question survey, and I only got the results if you completed it. So thread, survey, send it, go to bed. I have 3,000 followers. So I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be really cool if like 10 people were interested in this? And I wake up and the thread had gone viral. The thread got like probably 1 million views, a couple thousand likes, which for me at the time was like, when you go into Twitter and it's got the like how many notifications that you have, and mine would usually be like 3, 4, and it had the like, and sometimes it has 20 plus, and occasionally I learned it has 99 plus, and it was a 99 plus, and I was like, did I get hacked? Like, what happened? But yeah, we woke up, we had 150 people who wanted to do it.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm assuming this was through a series of trial and error, posting consistently for 30 plus days. I mean, were you already knee deep into the program, or the first week hit it out the gate, you went viral, and then the rest is history?
No, I had taken Sawhill's class. This was sort of October. It was only a week long, so it was like first, second week of October. I was still posting for probably another 4 to 6 weeks after that. Again, some reasonable like traction, but nothing, 50, 100 likes, not thousands. And this was the first one that went legitimately viral. And that was probably the end of December. So it was, and again, I had gone from 1,000 to 3,000 followers. So in my head, I'm like, this is amazing. I've grown like gangbusters.
I think there's a massive opportunity right now for people who are in your shoes, who have something to say. There's actual experience behind it. You know how to speak to people's pain points or share frameworks in a way where it's digestible, aka, through Twitter threads or through LinkedIn or even regular Instagram threads nowadays. And then build a business off the back of it. You mentioned you've done it backwards. You've iterated, you've tested. Mm-hmm. A few things haven't been perfect, but a few things have panned out, which has obviously done both of you well as a married couple building this business. My point is, there's an opportunity here to highlight what you mentioned earlier. Build a business whereby you rely on AI you rely on, whether it's EAs or VAs or whatever you want to call them, offshore or even, remote. And so you're managing teams, you're possibly managing AI agents. Talk to me a little bit about now shifting the perspective of leadership in today's day and age for someone who wants to start, run, and scale a small lean business to the 1 to 10, maybe even possibly 20+ million a year. What in your mind, as someone who's training leaders, how do you help someone navigate the rope of like, okay, launch and start a business, lead agents, lead VAs, this is how you do it? Like, how do you even explain that?
Um, how long is this podcast? The
I want to go into this. Is going to be a masterclass, the Dave Klein masterclass, man. This is going to be great. So dive deep into it.
Let's see. Okay. Look, at some level, I think the starting point actually isn't that different. Like at least I would say we have a brand of management that is, I would say, systematic in nature, right? Like we try to be very explicit about people's expectations. We try to be clear about how you'd measure whether they're achieving those expectations. We try to give feedback in a reliable basis. We try to, and so a lot of it is systems thinking. It's like, what's my goal? How do I combine people, process, and technology to get an outcome? If I get the outcome, great. If I don't, how do I change the people or processes and technology until I get the outcome, right? It's management by test and iterate. And so I think what's nice about that philosophy is it does set you up well to then say, well, instead of me delegating to Jane on my team, can this be delegated to Jane.ai? Can this be delegated to an agent? And so you were already thinking about, well, what type of work is it? And where can AI do that? Where can I automate things away? Because the best thing I want to delegate to a person is nothing. Like if I can delegate it to a computer, computers don't need breaks. Computers don't go on vacation. I can swap computers in and out. Like there's a certain reliability, hassle-freeness to them if you pick the right things. As we work with leaders now, they're definitely getting this place of like, ooh, this AI thing seems kind of real. And I think for you and I, where we spend, I think, a decent amount of time on social media, it feels like it's everywhere. And it's like already over in certain ways. AGI is like 10 minutes away. I think for the average leader, manager that I work with in the world, maybe they've played with ChatGPT for a few minutes. It's like it's much, much, much earlier. And so the first thing I would say to them is like, you have to start just playing. Like, don't even create a hurdle of like doing something, achieving something. But you can't, like, don't watch videos and read posts about it. Like, pick a tool, try to get it to help you do something. And the second thing I would say to folks as they're doing that is like, bring your expectation off of the best person you've ever worked with and down to, is it better in some way than I'm currently doing it? So what I found when we started working with it is I put a mediocre prompt in and I'd get back something average because it has effectively learned all the information in the world and it's giving me the average of that information. Like garbage in, garbage out. And so I was like, oh, this thing's overblown. And that was unfair because I was skipping the value I was getting even in the mediocre response. Because if I had gone to, like, let's say I wanted to use it to write a memo or write a presentation or, write a blog post, the time it would take me to type a blog post, even if I had it perfectly formulated and articulated in my head, it might be 10, 15 minutes. The same length blog post is typed by AI in 10 seconds. So you're like, oh, okay, I've got a draft in 10 seconds instead of 15 minutes. Now how many more prompts can I offer it to refine and refine and refine to get it to be 90% good in 15 minutes? Probably 10 to 15. And the quality of what happens when you learn how to do that goes way up. And so instead of setting the standard of, was it perfect on the first try? Or is it somehow faster and more efficient than me doing it by myself? All of a sudden it opens up all these doors. And that's before we're getting into the new world of like agents and being able to send them out to do things for us. Which I am like I feel like I'm like day 2 of like, how does this work? And how can I trust it? And is it going to like max out my credit card? Like, what are we doing? But even just those basic, like use it as the assistant, use it for research, start to learn. One of the things that was really valuable for me I don't know if you've run into these things as well. There's like these aggregator interfaces. So we use Poe, and Poe gives us access to OpenAI, to Claude, to a bunch of others. And so you can start to see like, well, what's better? Which ones are better at what? Like, oh, OpenAI's data set is more current and can go on the internet. Cool, if I'm researching something current, I need to be there. Oh, Claude's ability to learn my language and writing is much stronger. Okay, I could take content from OpenAI and I could put it into Claude to like rewrite it. And so like, what are the equivalents for managers and leaders on your team? You know, can it give you coaching? Can you get ticked off with someone on your team and be like, write me an email, and then have it like read it for tone or dial it down or be clearer, take the emotion out of it. Like it's great at that kind of stuff.
I agree. I feel like those people in the, kind of in the beginning that you mentioned that have only played with ChatGPT for 10 minutes, maybe a week or a month or whatever the case is, you need to listen back to everything that Dave mentioned, because I feel like that's in and of itself an instruction manual on how to get really in depth with AI to be, for lack of a better term, AI literate. And so that actually pivots our conversation a little bit. And I want to bring it back to leadership and management. But one of the things that we were chatting about was delegating to a computer versus a human. Do you think that there is the potential of AI pushing out humanity, and as it pertains to teams, like how do you reconcile that?
I think it's probably going to go. I was going to say like yes and like yes. I think you're going to increasingly be looking at your quote unquote workforce and seeing actual humans, humanoids, AI agents, and others. And some of those humans are going to be right here in front of you, and some of these humans are going to be spread around the world. But I think, so you're going to see that, you're going to say like, well, that's less human. But I think the value of the humans in the loop are is what's going to actually be the differentiator, right? I'm at least in the camp where I don't think AI takes over everything, at least probably not anytime soon. But I think I'm watching real time. This is one of the beauties of our business is I sort of see test cases where I'm watching like CEO 1 do it the old way, and I'm watching CEO 2 in an interestingly similar business doing it with AI, and I'm watching them distance themselves. And again, I think it's happening very quietly and in places we wouldn't expect. Or at least I should say this: we didn't expect it 6 months ago. Now, in hindsight, it's obvious. But I'm watching. I was talking to a guy who runs a 9-figure HVAC business, and I was thinking, wow, that's going to be the furthest thing from AI, right? Like every house, every installation is bespoke, whatever else. And he was like, oh no, we've already replaced 10 people with AI, because we forget about like the procurement, like being able to look at a plan and say we need 1,878 feet of ducts is like a 10-second thing for the right AI versus, a human using a wheel to like measure it out and do all that. All the accounting work, all the legal work, there's all these different places that are maybe not the core focus of the business, but adjacent to it. And so I think you're going to see less humans, more computers, but I also think then the humanity is what's going to be the differentiator, right? That the more that we can connect to that smaller set of people who can do more ambitious things, who can make the connections that the average AI is not going to make. And I think the trend that gives me the hint to this is like the rise of all the groups, right? The mastermind groups, the Hamptons, the YPOs, the communities. It sort of was born a little bit, I think, of COVID, but I think people are losing more and more of like the natural community you got from work, because we're not necessarily in an office together, suffering side by side and having that shared experience. And so we go seek it out elsewhere. And so I think, anyways, I don't know how it's going to shape shift exactly, but it seems to be that people are seeking it. And so that can be a differentiator if you can be the one to provide it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of jumping into a different topic, but in alignment with what we're talking about here, is you spent 20 years in corporate America. You spent 20 years in kind of the traditional role. And then something came over you and you decided, hey, let me jump ship and let me start this online thing. What was that reframe for you? Because I can imagine that you're spending all this time. Obviously, you built up an incredible career, Yet, much like Sahil and a few of the other counterparts that we've met through this interesting online space that we share, um, they've also too kind of seen the light and jumped ship. And so, as you're talking to me a little bit about how teams are potentially going to be restructured, and a lot of this is being delegated to AI or could be delegated to AI.
Hmm.
AI. I'm thinking of the Almanac by Naval Ravikant and how he talks about these micro businesses and how he sees, you know, the world being just these micro businesses as opposed to these huge conglomerates. So, with that backdrop, is that why you decided to jump ship from this nice kind of cushy corporate job, or what made you change, reframe into something like this?
Yeah, I'd love to say it was. I would almost like drop it into two buckets. Like, what were sort of the catalyst to jump, and then what are some of the reflections on the other side? Because I think the point you're making about Naval would be a reflection from the other side. That was a surprise. For me, the 20-year career, I'd say like the candid main reasons were sort of like, if not now, then when? And I probably asked myself that repeatedly, but I don't know. I was in my 40s. My kids were in middle school. I had been at the same company again for 10 years. So it's my second 10-year stint. And I had worked in four or five different departments in the same company. So I'd also rotated around and sort of tasted it all. And the writing was on the wall that we were going to start shrinking. So it was like, well, I could stick it out and see if I survive it, or I could just be out in front and be a part of it. And so we had gone through a riff as part of COVID, and I remember going through that, was sort of generating all those reflections. And I went to my boss and was like, if I'm reading the tea leaves, we're going to do more of that. And I've sort of explored all the things I could go do, and I don't think I want to do any of them. And so if we're going to do that again, like, why don't you keep someone who really wants to lean into the next phase here and like include me? So that was a little humbling, but at the same time, sort of like gave me then a runway. Like, we sort of negotiated. So I had a little bit of a buffer coming out. I was able to sort of leave on my terms in a good way. So like, I feel like everybody won. That was probably the main catalyst. The other one is, it's funny, it's because it's Twitter related. For years and years and years, Mar and I talked about having our own business, and the gating item was like the big idea of the business to start. And I started to follow more people. Like, I was following, forget whether you agree with them, like everybody from Nick Huber to Michael Girdley, a lot of the small business Twitter, and they were really advocating like buying businesses. And it was not a world I really knew, had not really thought much about it. And it was sort of like the light bulb went off one day where I was like, well, what if we just bought one? Like, I do have a background running a whole bunch of different parts of business. Can I bring that to bear and like help, instead of proving something from 0 to 1, take something from 1 to N? And so that was probably the biggest other light bulb of, oh, I can go buy a business. The businesses, there's ways to fund them, or ways that they're not hugely expensive. The reason we got to the digital assets is like the multiples were pretty good. Like, these things were cash flowing. It was like a 2.5-year payback, which didn't seem crazy to me. And it was a cheap experiment. If it failed, we wouldn't be ruined. If it worked, amazing. And so I would say it actually ended up being in the middle. It sort of ended up paying itself back in a little and then fizzled out. But it opened up the door to the new business. I think that's like the catalyst side.
That makes sense. Real quick to interject. So, with the new business, because I don't think we kind of navigated people through, like, okay, you bought the business, it kind of fizzled out. You lost half your customer base overnight, basically, with Google algorithm changes. How did you bounce back?
The the honest answer is that business is by and large on, like, it's on mothballs, and it's like a billboard. It produces like a couple $100 a month. Like, it, we the first bounce back was doing a bunch of SEO work. So I got deep in there. We did SEO work. I negotiated a few new partnerships and some better terms. And actually, for about 15, 16 months, it was up 50% from where we bought it. So it went from, it was at where we bought it. It got cut more than in half. We actually got it above where we bought it, and then it slowly has trailed off. And then there was a couple meaningful algo changes again on the back end that bumped it down pretty fast. But at the same time, the new business was doing this, and it was something that we were really good at. We were really passionate about. it felt like a much bigger moat. Like I think it's actually, to your point, it's hard to replicate 20 years of actually leading teams. I feel good about that, where most of the people I'm competing with have never managed anybody, which is great. They took a course and they're probably very helpful to people, but I'm happy to stand on like, yeah, I've lived through that. I've had to fire people in that way, or I've had to think through a reorg and decide who stays and who goes, or I've had to shut down a business. I've had to cut costs by 27%. I've done it. And so all those things that you feel like you're feeling for the first time, like you at least have one person in your corner who has been there. Sometimes he got it right, sometimes he got it wrong, but I'll tell you either way.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things I talk to people about whenever they're starting, kind of bringing it back to full circle, a personal brand or trying to launch a business online is what's one thing that you have an outsized competitive advantage on, like a massive lever that no one else does. For you, it's 20 years in management, leading people, consulting. For someone else, maybe they built up a big business, even though they didn't spend the time or energy to build up their personal brand or their Twitter or whatever. It's like all that information, you can't falsify that. You can't make that up. You could technically falsify social media likes and all that other jazz, but it's like when rubber hits the road and you actually have to be tested on what you're talking about, you can stand your ground. And you've done that. I wanted to ask you one last question here because I think it pertains to everything that we've been talking about, and that is moving forward in the new direction, building up your business. You mentioned VAs as well as AI, but let's talk about the VA side of the house. People are now building these lean businesses, 10, 15, 20 million. We know of a few people that are making really good money and have very lean teams, high profit margins. How do you keep that camaraderie, the culture, the remote team really engaged so that you could still build somewhat of a culture, even though it's kind of a new, I don't know, it's not so new based, because of the pandemic, but it's still relatively new relative to, how most businesses operate. How do you keep that culture alive and build up your remote team?
Well, let me at least make it an explicit choice, because I think we both have examples of people who are, irrespective of where you are, what you do, you're part of the team. We have a consistent culture or way of behaving, and we want to operate that way. There's a choice that other people are making, which is much more, it's effectively like almost anonymous agents who are so guided by technology and SOPs that they're not trying to build a culture. They're trying to I don't mean this to be dehumanizing, but it's almost like they have code and they have human code that handles exceptions that code can't handle. And so I'm with you. I tend to go more the first route. Like if I'm going to build an enduring institution, I want to have a culture that we all sort of agree on, that calls out the behaviors that we think gives us a chance to win. But there are a lot of people making the call the other way. I've written about it a bit. In fact, I wrote about remote work last week. The biggest mistake I see people making is less so from companies that are starting from scratch and are remote, because they don't know any better. And so they have to find mechanisms for doing that. And so, for Mara and I, like if we're working with someone remotely, I don't worry about it because I don't have anybody else here that I'm already operating with differently. So we will build everything from the behaviors down to how we communicate, how we decide, how we disagree, how we give feedback. It'll all have been figured out in a remote basis. Where I think you see a lot of trouble are companies that were originally in person. Then they went remote for COVID. Maybe they're straddling now with hybrid. Maybe they've stayed remote. And they're still trying to pretend like they're in the office, even though they're not. And so they're not being disciplined enough to bring intention to all of those interactions that they used to get organically and they could just take them for granted. You have to re-engineer them explicitly. Like the example we give people, and they're always like, oh yeah. Like, so you're in a meeting, you're all in the same office, someone flubs something and you're walking back to your desk and you're like, oh, hey, I had, quick feedback on the presentation. You could have been da-da-da-da. Okay, but when we're all on Zoom and the presentation ends and Zoom shuts off, so now what? Are you going to take the time to call the person up and do they answer? And if they don't answer, are you going to circle back? Are you going to build something into the week where we're going to do feedback on a weekly basis? Am I going to send a note? Is that note going to be read in my terms? Am I going to record a loop? Like all of a sudden, and so what happens is like that becomes an infinite set of possibilities and nothing happens. And so now I'm in an environment where even with the intention of giving feedback to make the system and the people better, it's not happening because I didn't engineer it in explicitly, because I used to just get away with it happening organically. So I think it feels like an unlimited problem to people, but if you push them, you're like, there's only like 7 or 8 things you have to figure out. You know what I mean? Like, when do we decide? When do we, like, how do we debate? Or sorry, like, how do we decide? How do we communicate? How do we give feedback? How do we hold each other accountable? How do we measure work? And you could, like, do we have an explicit way of doing all these things? And then we just fold that into how do we operate week over week?
I love that. I think there's a lot to learn from whether you're starting a brand new business or, to your point, buying a business, you're working with teams offshore, even remote, in the US, Canada, wherever you're based out of UK. Um, Around the topic of leadership, I think that there's a lot to learn there. And to learn it from someone like you, I think that's obviously there's a lot to be said about the history that you have, both, kind of in the positions that you've held, and also too now running your own business and your company. So for those who are interested in learning more about you, what you offer, what is kind of that pressing thing that you're like, this is exactly what I want people to go to, or this is the brand new thing, if you have it, what is it that you wanted to share?
Well, I think we tend to have two sort of, I would say, people who come to us and give us 10 out of 10. They say it's worth 100 times what they paid. One of them tends to be pretty senior, experienced leaders who never have gotten on top of, like, they just always feel like they're underwater, they're behind, they're like not having the impact they want to have, they're losing good talent, and they're like, heart's in the right place, but their systems aren't. And that was really what the Management Accelerator was born of. And so, for people who are, if any of those things I just said resonate with you, like, that's why we're there. And then we've run that now for over 3 years. We do it in-house at companies. We do it publicly 3 times a year. A lot of our alums from that program said, okay, wow, that was like management 201 and 301. Do you have a 101 for my managers? Like, I want to promote this person. They're gonna be brand new to management. I don't want them to suffer the way I did for the first few years. Could you give them like a primer? And so we created a second thing called Management Fundamentals. And they are, again, 3 times a year. It's in the public. We go in-house with a lot of companies. But to me, those are the two sort of bread and butter. And anyone who wants to just get to know us more, we write a twice-a-week newsletter. Our promise is like tips, tools, and tactics. Like, they are management and leadership focused, but I always want people to be able to go and say, like, I could go apply that right now. I could take that literal one step, because I know that one step will get them to take a second step and a third, and that momentum is what will create change. So that's, if you trust us enough with your email address, our promise to you is you'll be able to do something coming out of every one you read.
I love that, Dave. Well, I'll definitely link all of that in the description here on YouTube and wherever else people listen to the podcast. One thing I will say is, if it was me asking you specifically questions that are revolving around today's topic, I think you have a lot to share about, because I share a similar trajectory, right? I spent almost 10 years in corporate America, jumped ship, have had my fair share of battles and obstacles, and not knowing, the ins and outs of really playing the field the right way here with building this type of business. And so I think there are a lot of people that I've spoken to, especially from my old employer, who are just kind of tired of the corporate rat race, so to speak. They're not necessarily rebels in the sense of, like, they don't like doing their job. They're really good at their job. They've climbed, specific, like, seniority positions, directors, executives, or whatever, but they're just looking for a change. Is that something that's crossed your mind? Have you thought about creating some sort of accelerator for people who have come out of corporate America or are looking to make that exit, that have seniority positions, that are looking to build something on their own or possibly buy something?
That's so interesting. I've thought about it a little. It's funny, in your full circle moment, you mentioned some of the coaches that give us, hopefully give us a bad rap. Hopefully we're not giving ourselves a bad rap. And I think some of that, there was like a line that someone's like, if someone's really good at making money, why would they give away the system to teach you how to do it too? And so the place I feel like I could play in, would be that I think there's a lot of people in the middle of their career who are like, I wouldn't even know where to start. And I think we could sort of draw upon your wisdom, draw upon my wisdom, et cetera, of these probably take together some of these insights on the other side where we're like, oh, well, that in hindsight, that was obvious. Like the one we were talking about beforehand, right, is I worked in corporate America for 20 plus years. And I was like, oh, this is what's safe and stable. And then on the other side, we lost a client. And I was like, oh, I just got fired for the first time in my career. And it had like a less than 1% impact on my pay. And I'm like, if I had gotten fired at any other point in my career, it would have had a 100% impact on my pay. And it's like so interesting to compare those two things and be like, oh, what I thought was low risk was actually pretty highly concentrated risk. And what I thought was risky, now that I've got some, I mean, obviously I have customers now and we have a thriving business, but like, oh, I'm actually in a way less risky position than I was 4 years ago. And that was not at all on my radar when I was doing my calculus to be like, not yet. I don't have a big enough cushion. I don't have the right idea, versus being like, you're on the clock and at any moment this could go sideways on you. But I was curious, like you're on the other side too. So like, what was your biggest surprise? Like what was your biggest aha? Like if we were building this class, if that's chapter 1, what's chapter 2?
I think the biggest pain point for me right now that I would say a lot of the people online in these coaching programs that I've attended, well, two actually, and these are books that Alex Hormozy has pushed out, is what is that offer that you can actually solve for because you have the credentials for it, and how do you get leads, lead acquisition. And so you stumbled upon something on Twitter that really blew up your business practically overnight. And obviously there's challenges and it's not always consistent and you have to figure out new means of client acquisition, but there's something there. You already had the product that you didn't even know could be potentially a product until you started to really share your knowledge around your 20 plus years of expertise. So for me, it's really productizing my knowledge, figuring out what people actually want, which is harder than it sounds. It's simple, but it's hard. And then number 2 is like, where are they? How the heck do I get in front of enough people where, to your point, I'm not relying on one client for 80% of my pay, because that was my mistake. That's where I end up failing as a business owner, is 80% of my revenue came from one client. And when they decided to end things, after 12 months of work, what does that do for my family? What does that do for my business, my revenue, et cetera? So 2 things I haven't perfectly solved for, but I feel like you could probably more intelligibly speak on those. And I feel like I'd rather learn from someone like you than Joe Schmo, who's really good at running ads and really good on YouTube, but doesn't really quite have that life experience on their belt.
What usually the sort of the couple of prompts that we'll work with people sort of in this zone, almost like adjacent to the leadership thing. One would be, so that 80% client, like while you forget that they fired you at some point, but like while you were working with them and servicing them, was it like a dream? Was it your ICP? Like, was it a dream client?
Yeah, I love this. Let's turn it into a coaching session, because I'd love to have people experience that with you. To be honest, yeah. First 3 months were, I felt like I was in honeymoon heaven. It was ideal. I think when expectations I would say expectations weren't met, or at least there wasn't that initial alignment of exactly what it is that I can deliver on versus what it is that you could potentially want, even though they didn't say that forthright. I think that's where the misalignment came out.
Okay. But then you had 9 more months on the back end of that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could get 5 of those clients, like, would that be a dream business?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 5, 10, yeah.
And then why, feel again, do you like can you go one click down on why they stopped?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly why. I'll try to share it in a way where it's not unhelpful for people, but at the same time, it also kind of just protects the overall brand. I think from at least from my vantage point, my side of the house, did great numbers, 130,000 subscribers on YouTube, built up a massive personal brand. But the one thing that we had a hard time solving for was, what is that pain point, that offer that from a consulting standpoint, he was specifically able to solve for, and B, that people actually wanted to pay for. And so when the investment was massive, because it was a massive investment on his part, and the revenue did not meet that kind of investment, even though it wasn't supposed to be a quick turnaround type of business, I think he started to see and potentially feel the weight of that investment as opposed to, and as it relates to an ROI, frankly, right?
Yeah.
I would say high level, that's kind of what it is, but maybe offline we could chat a little a little bit more about detailed.
No, I think it's for what it's worth. Like I've worked with different, both in this capacity, like call it work with agencies, work with other vendors. In my historical corporate life, worked with tons of vendors. Right? There is there's something very real to the like over communication and reestablishing what's true and not true, that almost every leader I've worked with, if you said, are you over communicating or under communicating, they're under communicating. And there's two sides to that too, which is like, not only like how much do you want to keep saying the same stuff, what percentage of the stuff you're saying do you think is actually hitting their ear in the way you intended? Right. And so, anyways, I can go back to like, it was very similar. Like I tried to work with a VA 2 years ago. A guy cold emailed me. I like always ignore them, but he just had something. I was like, oh, you feel like a guy, like, let me get to know you. It took a bet on him. And, oh, I've worked with these 3 people you've heard of. I do these exact things. And like, I have a process. And I'm like, great, cool. Like, let's start with these couple of things. And it went sideways pretty fast for the reason you're describing, because like, he was just like, I got it. And then if I step back and say like, well, based on everybody I've ever worked with on my teams and other vendors, like there's just a ramp period. And so like, we need to sort of like put that in and understand like what should be true at different points. And then if it's not true, what's our process for dealing with that? Like, is there acceptable variance or not acceptable variance? Do we get together and like go through the problems and like agree on the solution and then recast this ramp period? Do we, and anyways, I just sort of like hear you talking about it. I can totally imagine you doing great work, them being relatively pleased, and at the same time, the like little deviations become big deviations, and it's not because they were trying to like be like undercut you in your business. It's not because you were under delivering. It's just because they keep getting new info, you keep getting new info, and if you're not reconciling the small deltas to put it back together, they drift, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, it sounded like he drifted to like, this thing should be minting money, I'm paying a ton of money, and you're like, we're up 130,000 followers, like, what are you talking about? And then it gets into the debate of like, who's not doing what that's hurting the conversion, right? Is it the types of people you're getting converted onto the platform, or is it the quality of his offer? And I don't know, I just sort of feel like that is something you almost can't over communicate.
No, you're right. And I think, maybe you could speak into this for your offer, but I know you mentioned the people that are 10 out of 10. Sometimes we don't have people who respond to our programs or whatever we have to offer, even though it is valuable in a 10 out of 10 format. And at least for me, and I'm not saying this is the case for you, is there's some, not just under communication, but even kind of mismanagement of expectations. Like, I feel like that's where the ClickFunnels guys kind of make it seem like, oh, if you buy my program, you'll get $100,000 a month guaranteed. And it's like, there's a mismanagement of expectations, because sure, there's a potential of you earning that much money with this framework. It's true, tried and true, they've done it.
Yep.
But the expectation of, what about the 99% of people that don't meet that? How do you reconcile for that? And so I don't know if you have anything to share on that end, and maybe you could wrap it up there, but would you say it's fair to say that like there also has to be kind of a fair management of expectations, forthright, hey, this is what you're here for, this is what I'm here for? I think this is even relevant to leadership development as well, but what are your thoughts?
100%. So people often ask me, are you just teaching Bridgewater to everybody else? And I'm like, no, not really, because a lot of it doesn't export very well. A lot of it is either idiosyncratic to asset management, or it's very dependent on a specific cultural agreement you make up front. But I do think one of the pieces that I took away that I think applies here, or applies in most areas, is like, and every time I compromise on this, I pay the price. That like, you constantly want to be looking for the ideal fit. So that gets shorthanded on social media as like, your ICP, right? Who's your ideal customer? What's their profile? I think about it with recruiting, where a lot of people are like, can you help me get a job? And I'm like, you don't want to get a job. You want to find the right fit. And there is this, I wish I could figure out what information biases or cognitive bias is getting us in the way. But it's like, I'll talk to people who I'll put in the recruiting context. Like I'll talk to them and be like, your job description is not specific enough. Your culture, like everything's not specific enough. And literally almost everyone will say, well, if I make it more specific, I'm going to lose out on a lot of candidates. And I'm like, yeah, that's the point. Because you have to get super specific about your culture, about your job, about your role, or about what you're offering, whatever else, so that you can not talk a little bit to somebody else, but to like everybody, you can talk really well to just one person. And that's happening. We've been learning this lesson over and over with our business. I will say a couple of just like breadcrumbs for other people building this type of business. The people who ask me for discounts are always my worst clients. Every single time. Like, it's crazy. And the reason, it took me a while to arrive at it, but I'm like, they're asking me for discounts because what I'm offering is not going to produce enough value for them. Because the people who don't, like I have people who are paying me like multiples of everyone else as like one-on-one coaching clients, and they're thrilled. And it's because the thing that I'm offering solves 6 and 7 and 8 figure problems for them. And so, it takes so much effort to get someone to the doorstep. And then they're like, I'll come in, but just for half the price. And it like takes real courage to be like, nah, I'm good. Like, cause you're going to come in, you're going to be disappointed. I'm going to be frustrated that you're disappointed because I'm doing work at half the rate or however you want to think of it. And it's like that sort of, to me, that's sort of the same thing. It's like why we have to be like really sharp. Like if you are, what we say to leaders for candidates is like, if you are repelling 90% of people from this job description who would by qualification meet it, it's probably good. But like, think about that. 9 out of 10 people should read it and be like, that's not for me.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Dave, because you struck a chord. You struck a chord, man. So I feel for anyone that's watching this call, this is the real deal. Dave knows how to speak into the pain points and really pull something out. Even though I gave you very limited information, it's like, man, you're speaking right through my soul, man. I love it. Well, I want to wrap it up here. I'll probably split this into 2 parts just because I want people to really digest every part of this conversation. We went from, building business, leadership, the ups and downs of, managing, whether it's AI or remote Salesforce, or workforce, to now kind of more of the coaching side of you, Dave, where you're really literally giving me feedback that I'm like, that's the issue that I've been dealing with, And so this is super helpful. I hope that, if anything, anyone listening can actually take the time, if Dave has spoken to you here as well from a management perspective, check out the Management Accelerator. Dave and Mars are incredible people. I will attest to that, and I will put my reputation on the line because everything that I've seen from you guys, everything that I've heard, it's just not only just dialed in, but it just comes from a genuine place. So any last words, Dave? I just wanted to give you the floor here for the last few minutes.
Oh man, Nico, I just want to, I just want to extend my appreciation to you. It was a rangy conversation in a way that I really enjoy. So thank you for, giving me a little bit of your spotlight. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.